Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Today, we are hosting part one of a two-part webinar series called When SASE Met Hackers. Today's webinar is called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Hacking Galaxy. Today, we are joined by Itai Maurer, Senior Director of Security Strategy at Cato Networks, Alex Radek, Sales Engineer at Cato Networks, Christopher Jelke, Principal Consultant at Ferroque Systems, and myself, Amber Piche. Hi, everybody. I look after marketing here at Ferroque. Itai Maurer is the Senior Director, Security Strategy at Cato Networks and is an industry-recognized cybersecurity researcher and keynote speaker. Itai is a frequent featured speaker at major industry conferences and is often tapped by major news outlets for his astute commentary on and insights into the security news of the day. We are very lucky to have his attention today. You guys are in for a treat. In the EUC industry, Alex Radek is a veteran. Having played a role on all sides of the spectrum, Alex has been involved in solving application access and delivery challenges and managing teams in charge of improving and securing employee workspace environments for many customers. Alex has been involved with some of the largest and most complex Citrix implementations in North America, and today brings his knowledge to Cato Networks as a sales engineer. And finally, Christopher Jelke is a seasoned IT consultant with 15 years plus of experience in end user computing, Citrix ADC, and network security. He has a proven track record for delivering high quality solutions for large enterprise customers, providing expertise in optimizing end user experience, enhancing network security, and streamlining application delivery. Christopher is highly skilled in designing and implementing effective, secure, and scalable IT systems. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you guys here. Today, we will learn to know thy enemy by diving into the basic hacking techniques, the types of current hacking tools used, and the scope of these attacks. Demonstrations will include how threat actors conduct open source intelligence, ransomware case studies, defense evasive tactics, and more. We will discuss best practices on how to protect ourselves and our businesses. So today we're going to start by looking at our own network, our galaxy, and see how well you know it. We're going to look at open source intelligence and some examples, including a demonstration. And we're going to close with 3 tips on how to defend your galaxy against hackers. We'll finally close out with a roundtable discussion. So if you do have any questions along the way, please add them to the chat and we'll be happy to get to them near the end of our presentation. I'm going to hand things over to you, Itai. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining this session. Thank you very much for the intro and a couple words about myself before we jump into the presentation itself. So my name is Itai Maurer. I'm the Senior Director of Security Strategy at Cato Networks. And a little bit about what I've previously done. Prior to joining Cato, I was the Chief Security Officer at Insights, a company that dealt with threat intelligence, got acquired by Rapid7. Prior to that, I was an Executive Security Advisor at IBM through the acquisition of Trusteer. And before that, I was the head of the Cyber Threats Research Lab at RSA Security, where I manage teams of reverse engineers, underground intelligence, penetration testers, and so on. I've been doing cybersecurity for over 20 years now. Actually, I started my career back in high school. I wasn't a very good student, but I was pretty good with computers, so I hacked into my school's database and changed my grades. My father was Department of Defense at the time. He thought it was really funny. My mom was a teacher at that school. She didn't think it was funny. But that's how I got into security and into how you can, sometimes use computers for your advantage. At the time, it wasn't even cybersecurity or information security. It was just computers. Today, as I mentioned, I work for Cato Networks for over 2 years now, and I'm also an adjunct professor for cybersecurity at Boston College. The only reason I mention this is because we're going to see some examples of what my students do or did with open source intelligence, the demonstration that I'm going to do today, that really shows and highlights how powerful this tool is. And it connects to one of the myths that were mentioned in the intro, that sophisticated threat actors only use sophisticated tools. And it's simply not true. You can use very simple tools, as I will demonstrate today, not even tools, services and online applications such as Google to collect information, anything doing from collecting information about targets up to actual attacks. So I'm going to show you some of the things that my students did as part of their projects, and keep in mind these are not technical students, these are the non-technical students at BC, and so there's a lot that can be done even with simple tools like that. Before I jump into the examples of my students and more importantly into the demonstration, I wanted to talk about something that, you know, it comes from the military world, but is really also applicable to the business world. And if there's anybody here with military experience or intelligence experience, this schematic of the commander's critical information requirements shouldn't be something new. Basically, I literally stole this from a military booklet, military intelligence manual. It talks about what does the commander need in order to make good decisions on the battlefield. And you can see that there are three elements here: friendly forces information, essential elements of friendly information, and priority intelligence requirements, PIRs, which is probably the ones that are discussed the most when you talk about intelligence. But you can take this concept and very easily apply it to cybersecurity and to businesses and turn it into questions that analysts, security managers, I'd say business owners also at this stage, board needs to ask themselves about cybersecurity. And these questions are, starting actually from the right side, first of all is, what do I know about the adversary? And I'd say this is the most typical question in cybersecurity, and there's a lot of reports about different threat actors. You know, APT1, here's what they do, here's their techniques, their their tactics, and so on. So that's the most common question, I would say. The middle one, what does the adversary know about me? Now, in the military world, we collect that information using agents, right? You have a spy somewhere, and you collect information and about what the enemy knows about you, and he sends it back. In the cyber world, you could conduct these types of operations on the criminal underground, talk to threat actors, try to extract information from them. And the third question is actually the one that I think is very interesting and is not discussed enough. And that is, what do I know about myself? Now, I'm not trying to be all philosophical here about who am I and why am I here, but really, do I really know my network? Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. If I go and talk to CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, which I actually do quite a lot of, and I ask them, hey, Mr. CISO, what does your network look like? I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get this nice visual file where I'm going to see all the servers, and they're going to be all lined up nicely, and I'm going to see all the different areas of the network and the DMZ, and here are the servers and here are routers, and everything will be graphical and nice and beautiful, and it's just not reality. Because if I ask a threat actor, or let's say if we want to do it legitimately, a penetration tester, what does that network look like? What they'll start showing me is other things, like, for example, they'll show me this Wi-Fi router that Jim brought into the office 6 months ago because IT wouldn't let him use a Wi-Fi router, and so he just brought one from home, plugged it in, and now you have an unmanaged device, which is probably not patched, that probably has default passwords on it, and that's what the attacker sees. Or the attacker will see that user that Jennifer opened 2 years ago to test an application before it went to production, and Jennifer already left the company, but nobody knew about this other user, this privileged user she created for testing. And when the attacker is looking at the network, they see a privileged user, and okay, that's what I'm going at. So the way you see your network is not necessarily, and I dare say is necessarily not, the way the attacker sees the network. And today we're going to cover some of these things, as well as in the next portion of this webinar, in part 2, we'll see how attackers truly see the network, how they obtain that information, and how they utilize it. Now, it's very easy for me as the security guy to be here and say, oh, you need to do this and you need to do that, and why didn't you secure that? Why didn't you patch that? And it's not as easy as it was, and I recognize that. You know, if you look 15 years ago, the CISO had everything under their arms, under their wings, right? You would walk into the office, everybody worked from a location. Once you walk in, you are behind the firewall and all the security products that the organization wanted you to be protected from. But today, the situation is vastly different, right? Because yeah, you do have your office and your data center, but you have branches and you have global branches, and you use cloud applications which are out of your immediate locations, as are the global branches, as are mobile users and people who bring their own devices. There's so many issues associated with this kind of distributed network that you now have to manage, that it might be a little bit unfair of me to, you know, expect from someone to be able to secure it as you once were able to do. Although there may be a way to do that. But I recognize the fact that this is extremely problematic and extremely hard to manage, both in the sense of deploying different security solutions for all of these problems, as well as updating them and patching them and making sure that they all have the same policy and that the policy follows the user. So if somebody's working from home from a VPN, they have the same security policy as if they're in the office. In most cases, this is not the situation. I want to add on top of it that one of the things that I do at Cato is I generate a report it used to be every quarter, now it's every 6 months, where I look into our customers' network to see what is really running on their networks. At Cato Networks, we have over 1,700 customers now, and we do all their networking and security. So I can see everything that's happening on these networks. So I generate a report that has all kinds of data in it. One of the elements that I look into are what are the top 5 most used cloud apps. And as the person who generates the report, I can tell you the top 5 is not all that interesting. It's always Microsoft, Google, then you'll usually have Apple, or sometimes Facebook, sometimes you'll see Teams or some of the stuff that you see on the slide here. So I would say the top 5, the top 10, they're pretty much steady. They just switch places every couple of months. But what's interesting is when I did this report and looked at 2022 as a whole, and remember, I'm looking at all the cloud apps. So I have a list of about just over 1,100 cloud applications that we observe on client's network. Out of the 1,100, in 23rd place, most used cloud app was TikTok. Now, why is TikTok it's so far high up on the list of most used applications in corporate networks? I'm not even going to get into the discussion of is TikTok safe or not. You ask the federal government, they'll tell you what they think about TikTok. If you ask, TikTok or the Chinese government, same thing, they'll tell you what they think about it. I'm not even going into that argument. I'm asking the question of, do you have that visibility? Do you even know that this is what's running on your network? Because I can tell you, if you look further down the list at number roughly 250-ish, are Tor nodes. Tor nodes are dark net nodes, meaning people who connect to the dark web, which is, again, something you definitely don't want on corporate networks. And you see a lot of other things in the top 100. You see Spotify and Netflix. Is that how you want your bandwidth to be used, your corporate bandwidth? So again, I go back to the question of, do you really know yourself? Do you really know your network and what is really happening on your network? Do you have the visibility to see everything? I want to show you a couple of examples of open source intelligence. These examples are from my students. As I mentioned before, every year at the end of the class, the last lesson, the students have to submit their final project. The final projects actually consist of them using all the tools that I taught them during the course. The course focuses on how to think like an attacker, and at the end they need to design an attack against a company of their choice. I give them completely free to choose whoever they want. Of course, they're not allowed to actually run the attack, but I want to see how they collect information and how they would create a phishing site or a piece of malware, how would they conduct the attack, and so on. And also, if they were that company, how they would defend from it. And I want to share about 4 slides from final projects from, I think this is from 2 or 3 years ago. And you can see here that the students who submitted this, they decided to target a pharmaceutical company. This was mid-COVID, so teaching remotely. And they decided to target pharmaceutical, which actually is a vaccine manufacturer. And they said, you know what, we won't go up against this company's multi-million-dollar security systems. Instead, we found out that they work with this university hospital called the Karolinska Institute. I think it's in Sweden, if I remember correctly. And they said, you know what, that institute has vulnerabilities, which I'll show in the next slide. So we're going to do basically the Target breach. If you remember, Target was breached when their HVAC contractor was actually breached, and then the attackers jumped from that network onto the Target network because third-party capabilities, and then they traversed the Target network until they got to the point-of-sale systems, installed a piece of malware on the point-of-sale systems, and collected credit card information. So they said, you know what, we're not going to go directly. We're going to do just like the Target breach. We're going to go through this third party. So they started profiling this Karolinska University Hospital, and they found out through a tool called Census, which I'll demonstrate a little bit later. They found out that a lot of their servers of this Karolinska Institute are vulnerable. So they said, you know what, if we are now the attackers, this is where we go after. We know these vulnerabilities, we know how to utilize them and how to exploit them. That's our way into the company. But that's not where it ends. Because when we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about people, processes, technology. Now, everybody loves to focus on technology. And you know, I'm a technology guy myself. I'm a security guy. I love talking about technologies. You say 0 day, and I'll start talking for about 2 hours straight and not shut up. But there's a reason that people is first on that list. So they said, okay, we're gonna also focus on the people that work for this company. And they were able to find the profiles of all the executives in that company. And then they dug deeper using some techniques that I showed them to be able to find out where they live, car registrations, where their kids go to school, pictures of the inside of their house, the Wi-Fi networks inside their houses, all done through the internet, nothing that you have to, have any physical contact. So they used open source intelligence to collect a lot of information. Now, unfortunately, today, we live in the day of oversharing on social networks. So people share so much information. I mean, to be honest, I'm still shocked when sometimes on social networks, somebody will post something like, see you guys going for 2 weeks into the Caribbean or something. Like, seriously, just posted that. Why not invite like house robbers directly? Why would you post such a thing? But unfortunately, and as you'll see during the live demonstration, people share way too much information. They went another step, a trick that I taught them. Now, I'm pretty new to the US. I've only been living here 8 years, moved from Israel. But I found out that in the US, the deeds registry is public, which was kind of mind-blowing to me. Why does everybody need to know about my mortgage and see my documents and all my information? But apparently, it's public information in the US. So the students here went into the deeds registry, and they extracted the signature of the VP research of this COVID-19 vaccine manufacturer, which can now be used for all kinds of forgeries and signatures and whatnot. So I'm not sure why this is public, but it is. Another group decided to target a local hospital. And as part of that, they found that one of the executives there bakes gingerbread houses. This is another mystery for me about the US. No idea why you guys like gingerbread houses and why you think they taste good. They don't. But that's what she does. No problem. Collected information about her. You can see personal emails. They found out where she buys ingredients for these gingerbread houses and what contests she participates in. And all they did was create an email with a message saying something like, we know you bake gingerbread houses. We are opening a new store. We're going to have a big competition. Here's a PDF attached. Print it and bring it over the day of, and you get 50% off all ingredients. And that PDF was actually weaponized. It was a piece of malware embedded in it, and if you clicked on it, you actually infected your own computer. But this really shows you how moving from collecting information about something, about somebody, things that people may think are benign. Hey, I just want to show off my beautiful yet not very tasty gingerbread house. And just a couple of examples of what is shared in the criminal underground. This is a joke I use, but it's not really a joke. Unfortunately, it's true. You can look up a lot of information on the dark web and on different areas on the internet. So let me show you just really briefly before we finish a couple of examples of what criminals, and especially in Russian forums, because that's where it's at, what criminals are using, selling and buying on the dark web. So here, for example, you can see two examples from a Russian forum where they're selling domain admin accounts. So you can see here they're selling domain admin accounts to a company with 33,000 employees, a company that's worth $12.5 billion. And this is actually pretty old by now. This is from a couple of years ago. They wanted 15 Bitcoins, which if I remember correctly at the time was around $600,000. I'm not following Bitcoins so much, but I think it's a little bit less today. But you get an idea. They basically sell access to hacked systems and to hacked networks on the dark web. So it's really interesting when you think about it, because the dark web and the criminal underground is so diverse that if you steal information, you don't have to be necessarily the one who uses it. Maybe you're very good at, hacking a server, but you don't want to commit the next phase of the crime, which is, whatever it is, ransomware, demonetizing them, whatever it is. So you can sell this information to other people in the criminal underground, and that's what they do. You can see here another example from my home country, from Israel, a homeland security company, access to their network for the price of $3,200. Some other examples, again, from Russian services. Somebody who has an RCE. RCE is our remote code execution at the bank. I don't really trust this one. Go figure. I don't trust criminals. But for somebody who has a remote code execution at the bank, they probably sell it either for a lot more than $10,000 or use it themselves. But here's another person who's selling access to RDP and VNC. So that's like a remote desktop. Into systems. Now you can do this on Shodan for free, so you don't need to pay this guy 10 or 20 bucks for that. But he's selling access to systems that he attacked, and he's offering that for $10 to $20. I want to kind of finalize with a couple of thoughts about tips and tricks, to protect yourself. Now I'm going to focus for this section. I'm going to move from corporate to you, to your house, to your family, to your environment. But of course, these tips also apply to the corporate environment as well. So a lot of time people ask me, okay, you scared me. You showed me I'm not here to scare. I'm here to educate. But what do I do? So here are a couple of good things to keep in mind. First of all, make sure that your system is fully patched. Never ignore these updates that you see popping up on the bottom right corner if you have a Windows machine that say, we have a new security patch, do you want to apply it? Yes, immediately, right now, restart the computer. Because attackers will utilize vulnerabilities as soon as they are made aware of them, and will try to exploit different systems. So make sure your system is fully patched. I think it goes without saying today, but don't reuse passwords. Remember that repository pastebin I showed you? If there's a password there and it's actually the same password that you use on a lot of different places, then that's it. All I need is one location gets hacked, and now I have access to everything that you have. So make sure you don't reuse passwords, okay? And the third one is, don't overshare on social media. And I mean that for people and businesses, and people work at businesses as well. Attackers will use and do use them. In general, people ask me, okay, so how do I stop everything? My approach is what my sergeant in the military always said to me: if there is a doubt, there's no doubt. So if it looks mildly suspicious, or if you think it's wrong, or if you think that something bad is happening, then yeah, just don't click on the link. Don't download that file. don't reply to that SMS. Don't provide that extra information. So just be one step ahead of these things. Now, before I hand it over back to Amber, I do want to say these are my tips. But in the next session, we're going to look at tips from the attackers. So I actually have some examples from what attackers say you should do in order to avoid being targeted by them. These come from different discussions and, so to speak, interrogations of criminals. And I'll share that and much more about how to defend corporate networks and this kind of complex environment of branches and cloud applications and users and devices, how you can actually defend these complex networks. But with that, I want to hand it back, and I hope you enjoyed this portion of the presentation.
But really, really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. So we are going to move into our roundtable discussion. I'm going to hand things over to Chris. We've got 10 minutes to do some Q&A. If anyone does have a question and you haven't already entered it into the chat, please do that. And Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you, Itai. That was very excellent demonstration of open source intelligence gathering. So we do have a few questions. First question from our audience is, what are the most common types of attacks that you see that leverage these open source intelligence gathering techniques?
So in terms of the most common, it's actually hard to say which are the most common. I can tell which ones I've seen a lot of. I've seen a lot of them being used for all kinds of scams on social media, for things like recruitment, like you'd see somebody on LinkedIn approach you and say, hey, we have an amazing job for you and blah, 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 blah. And they actually know a lot about you already, and they'll use social media to kind of be in touch with you. We've seen this done both by cyber criminals. We've seen this done by nation state actors as well. There's some very well-known attacks that include, for example, a nation state that was able to access oil refineries because they were successfully targeting somebody on LinkedIn and got them infected with malware. And again, I have to emphasize this. Attackers will use open source intelligence to collect information. It's free, it's easy, nobody knows that they're doing it, and it works. So again, be careful on what you share and who you reply to, even if the invite looks very, very special or something that's very appealing.
Thank you. There's a few more questions actually. So, in terms of one of the questions about sharing on social media, how much sharing is too much? I know you touched on that a bit, but do you have any more strategies that people can use for social media sharing that could help protect them?
So yeah, first of all, I think I'm gonna state the obvious, don't share your phone number or your where you live or stuff like that. Sure, if somebody really persists, they can find some of this information, but don't just hand it out. Sometimes I see these posts around these things, but mostly it's just be aware of who is approaching you. And I'll say on a personal level, not on a corporate level, watch what your children are doing, because different attackers won't shy away from using not just social media, but games. I have seen cyber criminals approach people on World of Warcraft and direct kids to phishing websites. So I know our kids and families are using devices all the time. Be aware of what they're doing and who they're talking to and what is it that they're sharing. Other than that, try to use common sense as to what you are going to share. Look, I use LinkedIn, I use Facebook, but I try not to give too much away about myself and just remain with people that I know, hopefully.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, common sense is sometimes not so common when it comes to, protecting yourself on the internet. So yeah, it's a very, very complicated thing to do sometimes.
Especially when it comes to kids. Our kids grew with technology from day zero. My kids are with an iPad since they were able to hold an iPad. But most of the people on this call have been, taught about don't take candy from a stranger, don't talk to strangers on the street. Well, guess what? They moved from the street to TikTok and to Instagram. and stuff like that. So, we have to also educate the young about the dangers of these people didn't disappear, they just changed their methodology.
Just a note on TikTok. This is a question from the audience, but my daughter uses TikTok quite often, and I run some DNS filtering at home. So, I see like all the DNS queries going out, and we are comparing it to her actual usage, like screen usage time of like TikTok, and TikTok app talks a lot, even when you're not using the app. That's what I discovered. So, way more than like Facebook does or any like Instagram, like it's like constantly talking out to like their CDNs and stuff. And, maybe it's not nefarious, maybe it's just, it trying to give you the latest, TikTok videos, but it was interesting, to see like, how much network traffic, like at least from the DNS point of view, is going out to TikTok versus, Instagram for an app that wasn't being used on the phone, right? So
it's amazing how much information people don't understand is being collected on us from things that we do on social media. And I think most people understand today that stuff that you do on Facebook goes to advertisements and that, but it still blows my mind that people will take a piece of their DNA and send it to a company to know their heritage. I'm like, really? Do you realize that, now, I don't know, insurance companies can go and ask for that information and they won't insure you because they found something in your DNA that they don't want to insure now. So why share that? That's what I mean by oversharing. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. So Alex, I have a question for you actually. Someone asked about MFA, and we didn't touch on that at all during the 3 top tips, but they're wondering is like well, is MFA like a remedy for like most of these kind of attacks that we see on the internet today?
Well, I think it's better to have MFA than not to have it, but it's definitely not the only answer. I think just looking at a number of breaches that happened recently or even further down the line, the attackers were able to bypass those controls. So I think this is where we really have to get into a concept of zero trust network access. And once these attackers are in, whether you have MFA or not, how can you limit the exposure? How can you contain that attack and make sure that the damage they can do is minimal?
Thank you.
Ita, anything to add there?
No, I will just add one more thing, and I think we're going to touch upon it in the next part of this webinar. So I'm a little bit promoting that a little there. You should join because we're going to go a little bit deeper. But that really connects to that a myth that we talked about before, which is people sometimes say, oh, if you just have more security than the other guy, then attackers won't target you because you are not the lower hanging fruit. Wrong, completely wrong. If you are a tasty enough fruit, so to speak, then the attackers will be persistent and continue even if you have MFA. So just by being slightly better than the worst of it is not good enough.
Absolutely.
Amber, do we have time for one more question? Okay,
yes,
Amber says yes. So another question from the audience was like in terms of frequency, how frequently do small to medium-sized companies get targeted versus like a large enterprise customer?
I honestly do not see a difference. People think that it's only, oh, the big banks, or I'm small, I'm under the radar. No, we see major number of attacks against small and medium businesses, and actually for a very good reason as far as the attackers are concerned. These businesses are likely to have less invested in security, unfortunately, less budget to do this, less personnel to monitor these systems, because you need to have so many point solutions. Well, maybe there is a different solution, but you need to have so many point solutions that you need to manage that you don't have the personnel. And there's money to be made from everybody. In the past, it was only, hey, let's target the banks. That's where the money's at. But with tools like ransomware, everybody has data. Everybody needs that data. So everybody's a potential target.
Awesome. Like, great answer. Thank you so much, Itai.
My pleasure.
Alex, I don't know if you wanted to chat about our webinar that's happening in a couple of weeks or not.
Well, I think we should probably talk for a minute or so about it. So I think Itai already did a great job discussing some of the concepts that we're going to be walking through in our next webinar in 2 weeks. We're going to be looking to bust some of those cybersecurity myths that exist today. We're going to look into a concept of secure access service edge and how does that revolutionize approach to securing your environment and your users, regardless of where they are. What's the difference between different components of that SASE approach? And also to remind everyone, if you're not registered already, to go ahead and register for that webinar that's on March 2nd at the same time. So back over to you,
Thank
Amber.
you so much, Alex. Cool. So I want to thank you guys. Itai, amazing job. Obviously, you're definitely gifted in this area, and you have lots and lots of information that you were able to share with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you in a couple of weeks. I want to say thank you one last time to you guys. Really, really appreciate your time, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Have a great day, guys.